Thank you for joining me for Wednesday Wisdom. This is a weekly devotion where we follow the F260 Bible reading plan. This is week 21 of our study, and we're in the book of 1 Kings, chapter 18. Well, during this time, there is an evil king in the land named Ahab, and the prophet Elijah is standing up against the prophets of Baal. And he's the only prophet left of Yahweh, the true God of Israel. And at this time, there's 450 prophets of Baal. And so what he says to Ahab and his wife's god, Baal, that he's going to put them to a test. And so we read in verse 23, "Now let them give us 2 oxen, and let them choose 1 ox for themselves, and cut it up, and place it on the wood. But put no fire under it, and I will prepare the other ox, and lay it on the wood, and I will not put any fire under it. Then you call on the name of your God, and I will call on the name of the Lord, and the God who answers by fire, he is God." And all the people said, "This is a good idea." So they were put into a test. They said, "We're going to lay this sacrifice down with no fire, and if your God is the true God, if Baal is the true God, he'll eat it up with fire and devour it. But if he's not, and Yahweh is the one, the true God of Israel, if he's the one who devours the sacrifice, then we'll know who is truly the God." Now, these prophets of Baal, even though they're serving a false god, they're deceived. So they go first. And in verse 26, it says, "They took the ox which was given them, and they prepared it, and called on the name of Baal from morning until noon, saying, 'O Baal, answer us.' But there was no voice, and no one answered. And they leaped about the altar which they made. It came about noon that Elijah mocked them and said, 'Call out with a loud voice, for he is a god. Either he is occupied or gone aside or is on a journey, or perhaps he's asleep and needs to be awakened. Maybe your God's taking a nap.' So they cried out with a loud voice and cut themselves according to their custom with swords and lances until blood gushed out on them. When midday was past, they raved until the time of the offering of the evening sacrifice, but there was no voice, and no one answered, and no one paid attention." So they're deceived by this false god. They think he will answer them, and they go to very desperate means. They're cutting themselves. They're crying out. They're just going on and on, all of these prophets, and nothing's happening because Baal is not a real God. He doesn't exist. And so once they're done and nothing happens, Elijah erects the altar again, and he actually builds the altar and he pours water all over it to show that this is going to, when this happens, when this sacrifice is devoured by fire, it is truly a work of God. Verse 36 says, "At the time of the offering of the evening sacrifice, Elijah the prophet came near and said, 'O Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, today let it be known that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and I have done all these things at your word. Answer me, O Lord, answer me, that this people may know that you, O Lord, are God, and that you have turned their heart back again.' Then the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt offering and the wood and the stones and the dust, and licked up the water that was in the trench. When all the people saw it, they fell on their faces, and they said, 'The Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God.'" Then the drought of many years finally comes to an end. They see a cloud in the distance, and as the people turn back to God, the drought ends. Now, this would have been remarkable to see. None of us have seen anything like this, where the face-off of God's on a mountain. But here's the thing that we see, that God vindicates himself, that there is only one true God. And so we have to consider that today. What God do I serve? Do I serve a false God? Do I serve a God of idolatry, a God of money, a God of greed, a God of sex, whatever it may be? Maybe I'm wrapped up in some different religion and looking to some other false god. The reality is that those gods do not exist. They are not truly gods. They are insufficient to meet your needs, but they're also insufficient to be God, because they are not, and they're never going to fill that place that God has in our lives. But our God, our triune God of the Bible, he is truly God, and he shows himself to be faithful time and time again. So we must think any area in our lives where we're living as practical atheists. We may confess Christ, but really when we're sinning, we're saying, God, your word's not true. Your ways aren't right. My ways are better than your ways. So any of those things, we're really committing idolatry in different ways. So anytime that happens, any places in our lives, we need to turn back to Christ because he is faithful. He is the one who can keep us. He's the one who keeps us secure. These different false gods in our lives, these idols, whether you're a believer or not, let me tell you to trust in the Lord today. He is the one who is true. He's the one who can take us through. Believers, trust in the Lord. He is faithful. Those different areas of idolatry, the reality is that those false prophets, they truly believed it. It's not just because you believe something doesn't mean that it is true. But the reality is that God is faithful. He has revealed himself to us. He will keep us firm, and he's the one we must trust. He is able to stand up against any charge. We don't even have to defend him. He is faithful no matter what we go through. Well, thank you for joining me for this devotion. I hope to see you next week for week 22 of our Wednesday Wisdom devotion. Thank you, and you have a blessed week.